Communities have the ability to impact policy on a local, state, and federal level. In this institute, we will focus on the tools and skills used to unite a community of individuals who want to advance the same policy or types of policy to support children, youth, and families. It is the common goal that unites a community. In this type of advocacy, it is the community member's voice, personal story, or other advocacy action that can directly impact policy. You will hear from a variety of speakers and panelists to learn about the important advocacy work that can happen through communities and coalitions. Before we do that, here's a few housekeeping items. We want to thank you all for logging in with us today again, and we're so glad that you're here. You may type any questions you might have in our chat or question and answer box, and we will do our best to make sure it is answered. And if you're having any issues, please type that there with the interpretation or the closed captioning. We'll try to assist as quickly as we can. PCANC's Communications Manager Chris will be live tweeting this event, so make sure you check that out at PCANC and use the hashtag NC Policy Institutes 2021 ! Additionally, we are recording today's institute, and this recording will be shared afterwards. We now want to thank the sponsors for this event. WellCare and Essentials for Childhood. Without their support, this event would not be possible. We would also like to thank the State Collaborative Planning Group for all of their hard work to make this event happen. This institute is the first of 4 of the policy institutes hosted by PCANC and the North Carolina Collaborative for Children, Youth, and Families. The next policy institute will be September 28th and will focus on advocacy on the local level. You want to register for the upcoming events. They will be great. None of them are the same as they were last year. Each one of these institutes will be different. We'll be putting the registration links in the chat, so keep your eye out during this institute. If you've not registered for the other 3, you can go ahead and do that. Today, we will hear from many dynamic and engaging speakers. We will start off with a special welcome message from Dr. Charlene Wong, followed by an opening keynote from Dr. Kelly Graves, an Advocacy 201 by Ann Rodriguez. Then we will take a short break and return to hear a youth voice keynote from Elijah Lee. And lastly, a panel discussion with Mebane Boyd, Shayla Aries, and Greg Borum. So let's dive right in. First, we would like to share this special welcome video from Dr. Charlene Wong, Assistant Secretary for Children and Families at the Department of Health and Human Services.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Charlene Wong, the Assistant Secretary for Children and Families at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. I am thrilled to be welcoming you today to this North Carolina statewide virtual policy institute on advocacy, collaboration, and coalition building. The power of communities to advocate for and drive policies that support the health and well-being of children and their families cannot be understated, particularly during this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. At the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, we continue to work towards achieving our vision of children who are healthy and thriving in safe, stable, and nurturing families, schools, and communities. With that vision in mind, the department is launching a new division of child and family well-being that will work to meet the health, social, and educational needs of children, youth, and their families in North Carolina. We'll be working to achieve that by enhancing how children and their families can access programs that support their well-being. We know that coordination across programs in the mental, social, and health spaces can give more families access to these programs that they really need. An early area of work will be making it easier for children and families to access and utilize the nutrition support programs, for example, WIC and SNAP. The division will also be working to coordinate increased investments in child and family well-being. An example of early work here will be thinking through the use of the American Rescue Plan funds and how these funds can be used to close key equity gaps in child well-being, including more equitable access to the continuum of mental health services for children and youth. Finally, the division will be elevating the values of the teams and partners all across the state who are working to support child and family well-being. We're working to create a thriving culture in the division, as well as with partners, to really celebrate the positive impact that we're having on child and family well-being. To elevate and coordinate the critical work of supporting whole child and family health, the Division of Child and Family Well-Being will bring together complementary programs from within the department that serve children and families. These programs include nutrition programs for children, families, and seniors, such as WIC, SNAP, and then a child and adult care food program, the Early Intervention Infant-Toddler program, health-related services and programs for children, such as school health promotion, home visiting, and programs for children and youth with special health care needs, and school and community mental health services for children and youth. We expect the Division of Child and Family Well-Being to launch starting in the winter. During the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we've learned that we can make a greater impact when we collaborate across teams and with communities to improve access to our programs and services. We are proud of how we at the department, and with so many partners across North Carolina, including all of you here today, have transformed how we work together as a team to serve children and families during this unprecedented global crisis. Thank you so much to the organizers of this virtual institute for creating a space for us to connect and to build and strengthen the skills that we all need to advocate for children, youth, and their families. These collective efforts will allow us to make that positive impact for children and families that we're all looking for by ensuring that the programs and services are available and reach those who need them the most. Thank you and enjoy the Institute.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Now we'd like to transition to our opening keynote address delivered by Dr. Kelly Graves, co-founder and executive director of the Kellen Foundation. Dr. Graves?
Good morning, everyone. I'm so honored and humbled to join you today to kick off an amazing event focused on something that is very near and dear to my heart: advocacy, collaboration, and coalition building. And to kick us off, I actually want to bring you back for a minute, because in addition to advocacy work, one of my other passions in life is really the root of my advocacy work is my love for children. And one of my favorite pastimes, and I'm sure many of you can relate on the call, are those snuggling moments with the little ones reading stories that kind of capture their attention and their imagination as they dream about what could be in the world through listening and looking at those stories. And in those moments, I'm reminded to ask myself, how good are we as grown-ups, as adults, at dreaming about what could be in our communities? Are we allowing ourselves the time and the space to dream big without borders and without page limits? Recently, I had the opportunity to read The Three Little Pigs to my 3-year-old. You remember that fairy tale about the 3 little pigs? Well, for those that need a quick reminder, those 3 little pigs left home to seek their fortune and make their mark in the world. And before they left, they were told, whatever you do it to the best that you can, because that's the way to get along in the world. And each of those little pigs went out into the big world and built 3 different houses, each using different materials and strategies. and each one held up a little differently to the adversity that came its way. Well, today we're not going to keep talking about pigs, but we're all going to talk about different ways that coalitions and collaborations build in the community and how they can be different in their strength and their impact. We'll talk about what it takes to build a coalition that can withstand the strongest winds from the baddest of the big bad wolves, and not only survive the winds, but promote wellness from within its walls as well. And as I reflect about my experiences with advocacy and coalition building, I thought a little bit about the building materials that were successful at building a strong foundation, one that can stand the winds of time, a set of tools, so to speak, that help to build the coalitions in our community. So as we get warmed up for the day, I invite you to take a peek into this toolbox and build with me. I would like to share with you my set of 5 key tools for advocacy, coalition, and collaborative building success. And to do that, you have already noticed I do not have slides, and I'm challenging myself to not use slides today because I want to connect more directly with you rather than look at a slide. So my first tool here is a set of glasses, right? So the first tool in my toolbox is this pair of glasses because you see, to build a coalition, it starts with a vision. Vision, when we actually use it as a verb, means to imagine, right? So what do you imagine? What could be in your community? What do you see as a need in your community? And what do other people see as needs? How do those connect and align? And sometimes we need to swap out our lenses so that we can see perspectives from the way others see it as well. And are we willing to humble ourselves to do that? To challenge ourselves to look at things differently through different pairs of lenses? You see, vision is an essential ingredient to building coalitions. For if there's not a vision of where you're going, how will you begin to know about how to get there? Now, don't get me wrong, vision doesn't require all of the answers. The answers are within the power of the coalition. But vision is needed to begin to build that roadmap and identify that North Star that you're shooting for. And that vision should catch fire and be both independent and interdependent. That is, coalition goals should be connected to each other for success and should also be able to stand alone for biteable quick wins that continue to build the momentum of the group. These visions should be clear and big enough to be a little bit scary. I challenge you to dare to risk change, and sometimes that isn't always the easy route. Come from the heart, not just the head, and give yourself the freedom to vision and dream in your community. It is typically in the heartbeat of that vision that the power of the coalition lies. It's really where the passion behind the work lies. And that is what motivates others to join that work. It's the call to action. And it's not only the how we do it, but the why behind the power of the coalition. The second tool that I'd like to share with you is right here. You can kind of see this is a number array. And the reason I'm sharing this with you today is that there are strengths in numbers. And I'm not just talking about the numbers themselves that comes from having more than one. It's not just about the quantity. It's also about quality. You see, when you have numbers and you build strategically, you're also paying special attention to gathering and building coalitions that represent many different perspectives, that are diverse and beautiful and plentiful. Voices that don't just agree with what's presented, but that challenge and push us to see and think and imagine more. Voices that stir up good trouble, that motivate us to think about things in different ways. Because you see, no matter how open-minded we think we are, we're humans and we tend to see things in specific ways. So you guys have seen this, I'm sure. Let's take this picture, for example. Can you see the picture? What is it that you see in this particular picture? All right, everybody see it? All right, so when we think about this picture, most of us will see either a rabbit or a duck. It is really rare to see both at the same time. It's usually not until somebody challenges us to see it another way that we begin to see it the other way too. And that's sometimes how coalitions and collaborative work happens, and why it's important that we have those diverse perspectives at the table, co-creating the plans and driving the work together for comprehensive, equitable approaches to community change. All right, my third tool that I'd like to demonstrate today are, you guys see all these? Rubber bands, right? So tool number 3 is rubber bands. It's such a basic tool, yet so essential in coalition building, because you see, rubber bands are flexible. right? They're flexible. And at the same time, they're used to hold things together, right? In your work as a coalition builder, as an advocate, as a change maker, you have to stay flexible, right? We will need to be able to move and pivot based on the needs of the group at any specific moment in time, while also staying true to our North Star, which is our coalition's purpose. You see, just like a rubber band, you'll need to work to hold together multiple people and potentially multiple competing perspectives held together by a common purpose. If we lose focus of that purpose, the work can become disheveled and unorganized. You ever seen a rubber band that was holding something together pop or break? Well, you get the picture then. And even for those who have had braces on the call, you know that wearing rubber bands improves the fit of the upper and lower teeth, so you have a stronger bite. Thus is the case with coalition building. We're stronger when we are moving together, holding each other together, and as we collectively move together towards a common goal. All right, tool number 4. I actually don't have a prop for this one. It's consistency. The work can be hard and it can build slowly, but consistency builds your work over time, and it's the fabric and the catalyst of long-term change. Staying consistent is how you build connections with people. Staying in touch, working or playing together, you build a rhythm with people that's based on the consistent behaviors that you exhibit. And coalition building is all about relationship building. And speaking of children's stories like the Three Little Pigs, you all have heard the story about the tortoise and the hare. Slow and steady wins the race, right? Little drips into your coalition building bucket of awesomeness builds over time. The consistency of that action is what propels you towards reaching your goals and builds that momentum to collective impact. Consistency leads to transformation, and it's the secret in the coalition building sauce because it's the ingredient upon which relationships are built. And collaboration and coalition building is all about relationships. The 5th and final tool I'd like to share with you is my trusty hammer. All right, so this tool links into the tools, all of the tools we've talked about so far. And as the writer John Weldon shares, the key is to define just 1 or 2 things that ensure success and do those things consistently. There's that word consistently again. But beware of the hammer, right? The saying goes, once you have a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. In other words, we begin to not analyze the problem itself, considering what the issue is and how to best solve it, but we can tend to reframe a problem in the context of solutions that are already available to us. So with collaboration and coalition building, there's a risk of beginning to address every problem with the same tool, right? When we do that, we dilute our unique purpose and begin hammering at everything, which means we may only partially succeed at anything, right? So stay focused. Beware of mission drift and be careful not to veer off course unless the collective group has jointly agreed that such veering is necessary. Remember those 3 little pigs? Well, really, the message behind that tale is that taking your time to do something right pays off. We've talked about all of these tools, but tools in isolation don't help us solve the larger problem of what we're really trying to do. It's all about using the tools that we have and comprehensively. Tools are a first step, but it is what you do with those tools that makes the largest impact. Building coalitions takes time. It takes grit. It takes successes and setbacks, and it takes brushing yourself off again and again to do the next right thing over and over and over again each and every day. It's not easy work, but as the saying goes, nothing that is truly worth something in the end is easy. My hat goes off to each and every one of you joining today. The work that you do is so important. It is life-changing. It makes a difference. So as you get ready to embark on the virtual workshop today, I challenge you to think about these tools and how you can utilize them to strengthen your advocacy, collaboration, and coalition building work. And as the phenomenal Rosa Parks said, one person can change the world. So be that one. Thank you and enjoy the conference today.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Those were wonderful tools. I love that. I love the analogy with the rubber bands and the pictures and all of that. So thank you so much. So now as we move forward, taking in the tools and the information that Kelly just equipped us, Dr. Graves just equipped us with to go through the day, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Rodriguez, Executive Director of the Eye to Eye Center for Integrative Health, for our Advocacy 201 presentation.
Good morning,
Hello,
everyone. Thank you. All right, let me try to get my slides up here.
Okay. Let me know if you have any issues.
Can you see
There
them?
they are. Yes, we can. Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's see if I can get it to start the slideshow. There we go. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Ann Rodriguez. I'm the Executive Director with the Eye to Eye Center for Integrative Health. Thank you for having me back. I was here last year to do Advocacy 101, and so now I'm thrilled to be really kind of kicking it up a notch and talking to you about 201. And it's just perfect what Dr. Graves was saying. It just really sets up the speech that I'm going to give today, the talk that we're going to look at and how we do Advocacy 201. So let's start with just a little bit about me. I said this last year, I'm a policy wonk at heart. I love doing policy, and I'm so fortunate that that's my career. I worked in the US Senate, and I have been doing policy analysis for 27 years in North Carolina. And I was also a lobbyist in a membership association. But more important to me, I am an advocate at heart because I'm a parent of a young adult who with a learning difference and a severe anxiety disorder. And if I ever thought I was an advocate before, I have really, really learned how to do that the past 18 years as we've been working together. And she has become an advocate as she's a young adult, and that for herself. And that's so wonderful to see. I'm an absolute firm believer in the benefits of partnerships, collaboratives, and coalitions. So I'm so happy to be talking to you a bit today about that. And the Eye to Eye Center for Integrative Health is really about collaboratives and coalitions. That's what we do. We're a convening agency, but what we really work on is bringing people to the table with their resources with a level playing field. Everybody's perspective is important. We work in the behavioral health, sorry, I'm getting a little ahead. My slides are deciding to get ahead, I guess. We work in the behavioral health, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and substance use space. And the whole purpose for Eye to Eye is to progress whole person care. And we've been doing that by convening collaboratives and strategizing and then really activating change, moving forward and being those advocates. I saw this quote and I just thought it was perfect for today. Lily Tomlin, the comedian, said, "I always wondered why somebody doesn't do something about that. Then I realized I was somebody." I've certainly been in that position. I've said that before and then said, hey, I can do something about that. That's what being an advocate is. So today we're going to do a little recap of Advocacy 101 to remind you and refresh your skills a little bit on just the basic things. We're going to look at some definitions, and then we're going to take that deeper dive into building community collaboration and coalitions. And I really want to talk about why would we be doing this now, really to give you that motivation to look at it now, because this is really the time to really bring up your advocacy skills and look at the possibilities of partnering with people. And then finally, my slides are just scooting ahead of me. We're going to look at resources. I want to leave you with some resources. So Advocacy 101 recap. Let's start with the definition of advocacy: the act or process of supporting a cause or a proposal. A cause. I have a cause. I know that you have a cause. You wouldn't be here today if you didn't. So we are all advocates. This is the recap part about the NC General Assembly. They're the main group that looks at the budget. In fact, that's the main thing that they do when they meet on every year. They have a 2-year cycle that's called a biennium. And that state budget runs for that 2-year cycle, for that biennium. As I said, they meet every year. They start with a long session like they did this year. And long simply means by the length of time. So they started in January. Typically, or hopefully, they end by the start of the fiscal year, which was July 1st. They're still in session, so that didn't happen this year. The second year of the biennium is called the short session, and that's because they start a little later in the year, in the spring, maybe late April or early May, and then presumably and hopefully they end by the beginning of that next fiscal year. The beginning of the biennium is a fresh slate for them. Everything that's been done in the past, all the bills that have been considered in the past are done and in the archives, and we've got a fresh slate to start with. So as I said, they're finishing up their long session, hopefully finishing it up. They started it in January. In June, the Senate came up with their budget proposal and they published it. In August, the House came up with their budget proposal and they published it. The two looked very different. There are items that are not the same and are in contention. So they have to negotiate. And that's what they're doing now, because ultimately they have to pass one budget proposal and send that to the governor. So right now they are working on negotiations on the budget. So they send it to the governor. He has a couple options that he can do with a bill, any bill that comes, not just the budget, but any bill that comes to his desk. He can sign it into law saying that he supports it. He can veto it and send it back to the legislature saying that there are problems with this, I can't support this. And then they can either override that veto with a majority, or they can look at reworking the bill and sending it to him again to sign. And then for the governor, he can also let it sit on his desk for 10 days, and then it will become the law. And he's basically saying, I don't necessarily support this. I'm not so opposed to it, but I'm not going to sign it into law myself. So again, as I said, we've got that clean slate when you start a biennium in the long session. So bills can be introduced at that time, but they have to meet deadlines. And those deadlines would include when they are drafted and when they're filed. And then also, if they don't have funding in them, they have to meet a crossover deadline. That means that it's passed either the Senate or the House, one of those two, by that crossover deadline in order for it to stay alive throughout the biennium. If it doesn't, it dies. There are other ways to get that bill, the contents of the bill continued on, but it can't be done through that bill. As I said, that short session starts around April or May. So the next short session, when they finish up the long session, is April or May of 2022. The fiscal year then for that would begin on July 1st, and that short session would be used to sort of tweak the budget because they've already established it in the first part of the biennium. Now they're going to tweak it. But sometimes things come up. The pandemic is a perfect example of that, where priorities change and other things rise to the top. And so it becomes more than tweaking. They have to really work on the budget to make sure that that priority that came up is focused on. And again, if bills did meet crossover, or if they have funding attached to them, they stay alive through the biennium. So they'll stay alive through the short session. So when the session is out, when the General Assembly isn't meeting, that is actually the best time to meet legislators, because there is a lot going on during what's called an interim. They are working on developing bills that they're going to then introduce. So if you want to advocate, if you think that there's something that needs to be legislatively driven, during the interim is a perfect time to get up with your legislators and talk to them about what your cause is, what your bill is, what you see needs improvement in the state. So it's a time for opportunity. Also, legislators are not so busy. They're not in Raleigh running from meeting to meeting. They may be back at home closer to you. So it's a perfect time to meet them. There's also a little bit more work going on through joint legislative oversight committees. These are committees that are only allowed to meet during the interim. They formulate recommendations that turn into legislation. So those meetings become very important to us. And some of those joint legislative oversight committees that are pertinent to child, youth, and family issues are the Health and Human Services, Medicaid and Health Choice, the Committee on Education, and last year, one came up that only met during the interim, the House Select Committee on COVID-19. So we've looked at legislation, we've looked at those statutes that becomes law. Where does the detail come in? Well, the next step to adding some detail to that are rules and policies that the state government will do. A lot of what we do is in the realm of the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as education and public safety. There's a rulemaking process in each one of those, but all of them are overseen by the Office of Administrative Hearings. They handle the entire rule process for North Carolina. It's OAH is the acronym, if you've heard that before. And by the way, everything that's in blue is a link. So when you get these slides, you'll be able to link to those and kind of peruse and do a little surfing yourself. Under the Department of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of DHHS can do rulemaking herself. But in addition to that, for us in mental health, the NC Commission on MHDD SAS does rulemaking. Now, the chapter in statute that we want to know, and I want you to be familiar with this term, is 122C. 122C is the statute that does community-based and inpatient mental health, intellectual and developmental disability, and substance use services. So it's just good to know that term and what people are referring to. So we have the NC Commission on MHDD SAS, and then Medicaid is a big part of the service system for children, youth, and families. The NC Physician Advisory Group works with the Secretary to develop rules and process them for Medicaid. And in addition, I'm going to skip down on my slide to the clinical coverage policies for Medicaid. That gets into even more detail, but they're required to go through a process of gathering feedback, publishing it, gathering feedback before they make changes to the clinical coverage policy. So again, an opportunity to advocate for what you know will work in the community. The NC State Board of Education is responsible for the rulemaking for education, and NC Department of Public Safety does juvenile justice rulemaking. The other thing that state government does is policy making. That doesn't have to be done by rule. It doesn't have to necessarily be done by legislation. Secretaries have authority to do that. A good example of what's going on right now with policy is Medicaid transformation. And the Department of Health and Human Services has been extremely transparent in what they're doing. So they have an entire website devoted to Medicaid transformation that you can look at and find information. And in there are their concept papers of what their vision is for Medicaid transformation. There are also resources for you. If you went into one of their playbooks, you would see like posters you could print out and information in Spanish. They have all sorts of things that are good resources for you to learn about Medicaid transformation so you can develop your positions on it. And I want to leave you with one more rules resource on this. On the General Assembly website, there is a link, and it's also on this slide, to the North Carolina statutes and the rules. Again, 122C is the one that you would be looking at. So there are lots of ways to advocate at the state level. You can serve on committees and work groups. You can put yourself on mailing lists. I'm on mailing lists for legislative committees that mean something to the work that I do. The subscriptions are free. You just go on the General Assembly website and you go to that committee and subscribe to it. If you go back to the Office of Administrative Hearings, OAH, you can put yourself on their subscription list to receive any kind of notification of rules changes. You can find groups that have the same purpose and cause that you do, that you're advocating for, and they can become your go-to resources. You can look at them periodically and find information. Eye to Eye does a newsletter that we put on our website. It's free. It has, for example, an analysis of all of the concept papers that have been done. We're not alone. Lots of organizations have those resources and you can follow them. So take advantage of free opportunities. And I have seen in the pandemic where there have been many more free webinars. It's not because of the pandemic, it's because we've become so much more comfortable with virtual and really accessing things virtually. So there are webinars that are free. There are downloads of white papers that could really help you and inform you. So we've talked about Advocacy 101. You determine your goal as an individual or an organization. You create your message that's really focused on that goal. You identify the key people, and I've put legislators and policy leaders here. It could be county commissioners. It could be local constituents or other community organizations that you work with. Create your message so it's focused and on point. And then you convey your message. You have meetings with them, and they could be virtual or in person. You have emails and you have phone calls. So now we're going to kick it up a notch. We're going to go to Advocacy 201 and talk about coalition and collaboration building to expand your capacity to advocate. We're going to start with definitions. Whoops. Let's start with collaboration. To work jointly with others or together, especially in an intellectual endeavor. The key is to work jointly with others. So working with them on policy just brings in a whole new way for you to really build up your message. A coalition is a body that's formed by coalescing originally distinct elements. So there could be an issue that there are several different types of organizations that usually work on separate issues, but there's a similarity, a commonality among them. So you build a coalition to really work on that issue. For example, there is a coalition that is completely focused on the funding for mental health, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and substance use services. It's been in existence since the early 1990s, and they have been working on that. It's a coalition of providers, advocacy agencies, and payers. They've done a whole lot of work in our state, but on an average day, they work by themselves in their organizations. This is a new word that I wanted to present to you, coopetition. You cooperate and you compete if you're a provider or a payer. It's a collaboration between business competitors in the hope of mutual beneficial results. So as a provider, as a community member, you may see legislation play out. It goes to rule, it goes to policy, it comes to the community, and it's not quite right. It's not quite viable. And so there might be another organization that you compete with that feels the same way. And so on any given day, you're competing with them. But when you're working on that, you come together. And I don't know if this is the right form, but you cooperate. Maybe I'm making that up. Coopetition. It's a sort of a new word to me, and I wanted to share it with you. So now we're going to take an even deeper dive into building community collaboration and coalitions. Let's see. Starting with a quote from Helen Keller, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." So what are the advantages of collaborating and building coalitions? Well, the first one is that you pool resources. So it's not just you or your organization working on it. Now it's the resources you have and the resources that others have that you're bringing together. You broaden your network. So you know what your reach is and you have that to share. But when you bring in others and other organizations, you are broadening that, you are enumerating that, so there are more people that you can reach out to with your message. And you share in the legwork. So if there are just a few of you in your organization, or if it's just you, Then when you are bringing in other people and you're collaborating with them, you're building a coalition, then you have created more, you haven't created, I'm sorry, there are more individuals that can work together and really do that legwork, because as Dr. Graves said, it really does take work to build collaborations and make them sustainable. And so the more people that you have, the less work that you're having to do. You can really focus your energy on the things that you love. You can share strategies and experiences, what has worked and what hasn't worked. Who have you talked to that you discovered has a real compassion for what you're working on, a real heart for that? There may be a legislator or a county commissioner who you didn't know was particularly interested in what you're working on. And so that's a great connection to make. And that you might want to share that with other people. And you then build your network and your connections much more. And you develop those relationships and that trust, so that if you're successful in this issue that you're working on together and you're collaborating on, you may find that there's another very similar thing that comes down the pike and you want to work together again. You've already built that trust and you've already built that relationship. So it really helps you in the future. You show your capacity to partner, that by doing this, you show others that I'm ready to partner. We can do this together. And you increase respect for you and your organization and the awareness of what you can do, and most importantly, for your message. But there are challenges to collaborating and coalition building. They're easy challenges, but they're there and you need to recognize them to really make it sustainable. It entails clarifying your bottom line. What is the most important thing that you want to achieve? Because you may have a whole group of things that you want to achieve, but you need to prioritize them. Because when you work in a group, it's a win-win, but it may not be 100% of what you're looking for. And so you have to figure out what's most important. And frankly, when you're working by yourself, you may not get 100% of what you want to accomplish. It also necessitates in your organization a different kind of vetting and process. It means that you have to make sure that when you go to that table to collaborate, when you are in that coalition, that you are truly speaking for the people behind you. You're speaking for your organization and your network. So you need to kind of work through the issue. And again, going back to identifying what are your priorities. And it also assumes that your organization, and particularly your leadership, are behind you. You may be your leadership, so you know when you go to that table, you have that support. But you may not be the leadership, and you want to make sure that you can say, everybody, bottom up, supports what I'm saying here from my organization. It requires ongoing participation to ensure that your voice and position are heard and are always incorporated. And then as a group, it's really important, or let me go back and say as an individual and within your organization, and then we'll get to the group later, it's really important to do periodic evaluation of this, to kind of take a step back and say, is this collaborative process still working toward our purpose? Is our message still being worked on? And so now we're going to talk about ensuring that every voice in that collaborative and that coalition is valued and it's heard. That's a really important part of sustainability for a collaboration. People have to feel valued in order to continue. So as Dr. Graves talked about, you really think about your membership in that collaborative and coalition. And it may be one that's already existing and you want to reevaluate the membership. Do you have the right perspectives at the table? And sometimes some perspectives bring in a challenge because it's not historically the way that your conversation has gone, but it's worth it to do that if that moves your message ahead for you and you get a fresh perspective that is really pertinent to what you are fighting for. So consider your membership and your perspectives. And since we have really started focusing much more on racial and health equity, it's really important to look at it and make sure that you do have the right people at the table, that every perspective is represented from that sense as well. And then if they haven't been included, try to bring them in. And before, I know the inclination is to go right to the substance of it. You're dying to talk about this issue that's near and dear to your heart, that's so meaningful to you. But to really, again, make that collaboration sustainable, you want to take a little time and understand each person's perspective. And you want to understand what they want to achieve by being a part of that collaboration or that coalition. It's worthwhile to take that time and start that from the beginning where you understand it and can appreciate it. And you might be able to consider options for compensating individuals who are willing to participate, but really don't have any means of being compensated for being there. I'm in an organization, so I'm compensated when I spend my time, most of the time, doing this. But there are family members, as a family member, that you really have a very hefty schedule that you're trying to work through. So compensation could really bring in those perspectives that you're looking for, those new and different perspectives. And then providing resources and education tools that levels the knowledge base for everyone is really important. Now, I saw this when I was a staff to a membership association, that those members, when you create the meaning from your membership, it's already weighted towards them, and the others that come to the table, it's a little hard to level that out. But if you are really just kind of leveling the knowledge base and giving resources to everybody so everybody understands and has the same understanding of the issue, then you really do start with a level playing field and everyone is at the table with a more equal voice. You create an atmosphere and a group expectation for everyone that thinking out of the box is a good thing. We don't necessarily want to say, but that's the way we've always done this. We want to look at, well, about 10% of what we have done is pretty good, and we want to keep that. So let's keep that, but let's start thinking outside of the box. What ideas do we have to really bring this up a notch, this idea, and make it bigger and more innovative in our communities? And then, as I mentioned, as an individual in an organization, also as that collaborative and as that coalition, you want to periodically check in with members to make sure that it's still meeting their needs. The last thing any of us needs is an endless meeting and series of meetings of a group that never seems to get anywhere or end. Because again, then you find that you don't have the time for that and you lose membership. So I wanted to just give you one example that we are working on right now, a collaborative to define the value of care management from the perspective of consumers and family members. This is actually a grant and it is a facilitated process. And I'm so happy that later you're going to hear from a panel of collaborative efforts, coalitions that are working from the community. But we pulled together a representative group, and there were two partners, Eye to Eye and the North Carolina Community Health Centers Association. And actually, we're still in process on this collaboration. So we have members from the LMEMCO system, and we have members from the FQHC system, the public safety net, and we've brought them together. The collaborative is heavily weighted toward consumers, families, and people with lived experience. And then we also have some providers in there that are planning to be and working toward being care management agencies so that they can give us their perspective of what their expectations are, but more importantly, so they can hear what the perspectives are of the people who are the consumers, the lived experience, the family members. We've tried to bring in that equal partnership by really giving them that education, defining what their roles are and what the expectations are. We've kind of expanded it, bringing into play the pandemic and the racial equity and social determinants of health, some of those really important issues that are rising to the top. And the whole purpose, again, is to identify the issues and priorities from the perspective of consumers and family members. So we were able to secure compensation for everyone. What we did, it was not a part of the grant. What we did was we went to organizations that we knew were interested in this and asked them for donations, and they gave them to us. And we agreed to share our products from the group. So we receive everyone that is there, not affiliated with an organization, will receive compensation. We started with interviews, and this, if you were in just a collaborative process with no facilitation, would probably be done just at your meeting, where you really are getting that sense of why are people at this table, why is it important to them, and what do they want to achieve. And then the first meeting that we had was a level setting educational component. We brought in a subject matter expert who talked about the care management role, so everybody heard the same thing and understood that. The group identified 4 areas that they want to focus their discussion on. Right off the bat, we had a strategy, and that was great. And then we started with absolutely no preconceived concept of what our products would be. We did not think through, we want this and this and this at the end. And that allows for a real organic process for that group to think through when they're discussing it and say, hey, I think this is a great idea. And I've listed some of the great ideas that they've already worked on that have nothing to do with just developing policy recommendations. There are other tools that we can share with people and start using in communities. So why is this so important now? I mean, now is an incredible time. I've written opportunity 3 times because there is a confluence of policies, both nationally at the federal level and at the state level, that is then going into communities. It's opportunity all around for you to advocate and to make a change, for your voice to be really impactful now. One of those things is whole person care, and I call it whole child care for our purposes today. That's bringing together, integrating all those things that are important to a person's health and well-being. System of care is one of those, and I'm sure you've heard that term. We have guiding principles that we've used for a few decades in the state on system of care, and they align beautifully with our vision for whole person care. Dr. Wong is actually the executive director of a grant process that's going on, the Integrated Care for Kids grant, that will be looking at and piloting coordinating services across areas like education and juvenile justice and mental health and social services, areas where they really have been a little bit siloed at times, and it varies amongst communities. Medicaid and health choice transformation. We've talked about that already today, about care management making a big difference because we're going to be integrating care and looking at a multidisciplinary approach to services and care plans. That's really important. And social determinants of health, bringing in those non-medical drivers, transportation, food security, housing, and interpersonal safety into what will make somebody successful in the services that they're receiving. And then there's a national focus on value of services. And so far, it's really been driven by what really providers and payers need to look at. But we're kind of changing that, and we're looking at what's that value for family members and for children and youth. It balances the quality and the cost. So at the federal level, they've passed the Families First Prevention and Services Act. And in North Carolina, we're looking at changes to the child welfare system. Those two marry together to really compel us to look at cross-system coordination. It makes us look at not higher level services for kids and not taking them out of their homes, but what are the lower level prevention, promotion, early intervention things that we can really focus on intensely and help families. The state is working on the foster care specialty plan, and that's another way that we're really pushed towards coordinating services for children and their families. And then another initiative that's been going on for a few years is the school-based mental health initiative. And that is recognizing that schools spend so much time every day, school workers, teachers spend so much time every day with these children that they really know them. And they're doing regional networking, again, cross system, to share information and start building communication lines, to start collaborating and really building partnerships. So there is a lot going on in the state, and all of this is opportunity for you to impact it. I don't want to leave you today without some resources. So these are a few resources that I use. If you Google collaboration and coalition building in health and human services, you will get a lot. But these are some that I have found to be really, really helpful. So I wanted to share them with you. And of course, they are links. And then the organizations that work to put together these advocacy institutes, they're organizations that are ready to partner with you. So here are the links to them. There are many more in North Carolina that are ready to partner with you and collaborate and really start working together on issues that support children, youth, and families. So of course, my message today is that child and family involvement in advocacy makes a huge impact. And I really want to encourage you to begin doing it. You have a perspective that is so important. We heard from legislators last year that they wanted to hear from you because they didn't understand the issues the way that you do. So really, that's so important. And that's why you're here today. And that's why we're doing the Advocacy Institutes. I want to do a little quick plug for our conference coming up December 8th through 10th, because we do have some sessions and networking opportunities. We offer a 50% discount for consumers, and we have a consumer participation scholarship fund with limited scholarships for you. So there's that information. And wrapping it up, I want to give you my contact information. If you have questions or want to talk further about anything that I've talked about today, feel free to contact me. There's my email and my phone number. And thank you so much. I really look forward to working with you all and to see the voice of children, youth, and families just raise up and really have a strong impact on all of the work that we do in the communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was so much wonderful information in a short time, and I know that it was awesome. I've seen some comments in the chat that it was wonderful information and that they really loved it. Thank you for giving us that foundation and recap of what we learned last year, and then how to proceed this year and moving forward with things. So thank you so much. Thank you. So right now, we would like to give you guys a 5-minute break, and then we will be back at 10:06 for our Youth Voice keynote, and then to finish up with our panel discussion. So actually it's 10:02, so we'll give you to 10:07, and we'll be back with our youth speaker and panel.
Hey.
welcome back, everyone, from the break. I don't know about you, but it flew. 5 minutes does not seem like long at all. As we continue today, we're going to continue this awesome lineup of speakers today with our Youth Voice keynote delivered by Elijah Lee.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elijah Lee, and I would like to first thank Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina for this amazing opportunity. I am so honored to speak with you all on this morning's Institute. As many of you may know, I am a very new 8th grader, and with that being said, I'll be coming to y'all via video. I hope this presentation can be both informative, but also something that you are all able to bring back to your settings wherever you work with our young people, whether you're an educator or whether you're a guardian ad litem. We understand that it takes a village to raise our young people, and I hope that this presentation helps us get there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and jump right in. Okay. So I want to first start out by saying everyone has a story, and that by sharing those stories, we are creating a safe space where our young people can heal. And oftentimes we, as the people sharing that story, can even heal ourselves. I lost my father at the age of 3, and from that, I had gone through my own forms of trauma and grief. However, I also lived in a house where we talked about things. I went to camps where we talked about things. And because I was able to share my story, I found that I was able to heal myself. Something else I also found is that because I shared my story, I was also to help someone else that I would never see again probably also heal. Now, it is this building on one another, creating these bonds with one another that can truly help our young people overcome the situations that they have been put in. By sharing our stories with our young people, this allows them to share their story, but we then have to allow them to understand that this circumstance, this situation, that what they have been through does not define what they are capable of. That this barrier that they have had in front of them will not dictate who they become, and it is our job to help them get over those barriers. I want to thank all of you for allowing the safe space for me to share my story, along with the safe space for others to share their story as well. So we want to talk really quickly about recognizing the importance of safety. Now, I have a couple of points here. And this starts with honestly just being physically safe. This means that our young people are not subject to harm or neglect. We also look at psychologically safe, which is something just as important, where young people do not feel threatened, where young people do not feel intimidated, where young people do not feel scared, but instead they feel loved and embraced by the people that they care about. And this really correlates with feeling that sense of belonging and having someone understand that I am loved, I am cared for, someone cares about me. And also that feeling of sense of being loved. Now, the problem is that oftentimes when young people don't have these things, when young people don't have the parents or guardians necessary to do this, it falls on us as their community members. It falls on us as the villagers to really help raise these young people up, to give them that sense of safety. Now, these are just a couple of things that are just as important. It's safety to ask questions about your situation, something that truly helped me, but also just being able to feel heard and developing my self-confidence. Now, I have had a huge family. As you can see, I have 2 older brothers, a sister, myself, and then my mom, who we have all been through our very own things. But from this family, I learned a lot about having like a sibling bond, which has helped us all overcome our struggles and our traumas, but also having role models that were able to show me the way. These are people that showed me that, like, for example, college is important. So now I, as someone who's younger than them, wants to go to college. And so role modeling I have found to be very, very important. Now, I mentioned earlier that my family has been through some traumas, that we've been through our own experiences. However, we have come out stronger because of it. And so you can see a couple of points here. but I did lose my father when I was 3 years old. And because of this, I had to find a way to build my resilience. I had to find a way to overcome this obstacle that was put in front of me. Now, thankfully, I had a village, I had a community members, and I had messages such as don't be afraid to talk about your loss. And I was able to borrow memories from people, and I was able to go to camp. And because of these things, I learned that the power I had in myself. I learned that I am strong. I learned that life is going to throw things at me. However, I can no longer let that destroy me. That every time I go through something, I have an opportunity to come out better and stronger. And that is what we need to tell these survivors of young people. I mentioned a little bit earlier how it takes a village. It takes a village to support our young people. It takes a village to love our young people. Here are just a couple of people that it is your job to help too. And this goes for any community member. And it's up to our communities to rally together to support our young people. And right now, in a time where it feels as though 50% of all child abuse cases don't go reported, this is crucial right now. This village of feeling safety and creating those safe spaces, but also having our young people feel loved is more important than ever. We also I was able to learn a lot about the power of influence. And this is something that we all understand, is that we as young people are bound to look up to someone, whether it was my brothers or whether it was my mom or whoever it was. I was bound to look up to someone. There was an influential person in my life. And so this goes for all of you, because you are all the influencers. You are all the influential people in our lives. And so James Baldwin once said that children have never been good at listening to the elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. So with this being said, I'm asking all of you to be our biggest cheerleader. I'm asking all of you to make sure that your actions are things that represent love and care and safety. We also want to notice coaching versus demand. So showing someone something instead of just telling them to do it and expecting perfection. Understanding that we are going to teach leadership and raise up leaders instead of raise up people that will continue the cycle that they have been in. We also recognize that we are all individual people, and because of this, we are all very different. So allow us to blossom, allow us for our personalities to come out, and especially with our young people. This is important. We need to develop that sense of who we are. So I found a huge foundation in my faith. I found a lot of grounding in that. Now, this truly goes with everyone. I found it very helpful to find something that I could believe in. And this helped me overcome a lot of the obstacles that were set in my life. So here are just a couple of points about my faith as a whole. But most of all, I want to talk about how faith organizations shouldn't be judgmental for kids or condemning. That instead, we are meant to build areas where kids can come to us and tell us about their issues. We are a place where where kids can come to us and show us what is going on in their lives, and we are meant to help. Academics, as Elijah Lee, was something very, very important to me. So this is just a quote that I personally love, and it's education is the most powerful weapon in which you can use to change the world. And I truly live by this quote, because by making sure our young people are knowledgeable of their surroundings, making sure our young people are getting those good grades, making sure that we are pushing our young people to the very fullest, and sometimes even beyond, we are creating an area where our young people understand that they're supported, but we are also set out to watch them succeed. We are set up to watch them raise themselves up instead of having to rely on other people, which can be a difficult thing to notice. And so we also want to talk really quickly about school and how I, as an 8th grader right now, spend a majority of my time at school. I spend more hours at school than I do with my own mother at points. And so this goes out to our teachers and our educators, is that I need you all to make sure you are creating those safe spaces in those classrooms, safe spaces where kids can come to you and tell them about anything that's going on at home or anything that they're going through. So this is just a quick thing about wellness. And right now, during a pandemic and moving out of that pandemic, this is truly important. So I'm encouraging all of you to find that wellness in yourself, find that time where you can relax before you can help other people, but then also encourage other young people to find that time where they can almost disassociate themselves, everything going on around them, and just find themselves and then ground themselves. So the life of an activist can be something that is very oftentimes chaotic, I think is the word that we're going to use. It is full of fast pace and oftentimes difficult challenges. However, Gandhi once said that be the change that you wish to see in the world. And this quote really showed me that I, as an activist, I have been called as an activist to keep moving and to continue to represent our young people. And that is what I plan to do. So I want to talk really quickly about my exposure to child abuse. And it started in the first grade where a friend of mine told me about the abuse. Now, this is all completely different for everyone, but the biggest part about me was that I learned about other child abuse statistics. I learned that my friend was not the only one to go through this pain. And this put a burden on my heart, but it also showed me that I have an opportunity to make a change. So I really quickly want to talk about a woman named Maya Angelou. And this has been something that I personally have come to look up to. She is a phenomenal woman, as her poem states, and she is someone that has truly walked through life with grace. Now, she has had her own abuse and traumatic events. However, she reminds us that you may not control all of the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. And I think this is something that's very powerful, especially when we're talking about child abuse survivors, just because that they can't control what's going on. They are oftentimes defenseless and they're oftentimes unable to fight for themselves. However, we as their community members, we as their villagers can also make sure they are not going to be put down and reduced because of these events. So I personally was motivated by history to begin my activism, whether it's the civil rights movement, where I learned about the John Lewis's and things such as the Children's Crusades. But also I learned about the power and use of my voice from people such as Huey Newton and Angela Davis. I went to marches such as the Moral March, where I learned that activism is something still very new. And the first time I went to a Moral March, I marched for the rights of young people. And I said that our young people deserve safe spaces, that our young people have a right to a good education, that our young people have a right to be loved. And so this is something that I live by to this very day. So this is kind of the center of my activism, and that is an annual child abuse awareness march. And so this march is something that I have led for the past 4 years, going on 5. And this is a time where our community members can come together and we look at child abuse, because child abuse is something that we don't want to talk about every day. It's something that we don't always want to notice or look at. However, it is something that is truly important. So at this march, we all come together and we first say that to the survivors: we hear you, we see you, and we are here to support you. But we also say that we will not stand for this anymore, that we will no longer let child abuse be present in our communities, and has been something that's been around for way too long. So aside from my marches, I've also done things such as a pediatric safe room. So I did this, which is when I took a very grim, uninviting hospital room and I made it into a place where our young people can thrive. I did this because after I found out about what our young people go through after being found in an abusive situation, they're immediately taken to a hospital room where, as someone with older brothers who decided to play football, I know what that looks like. And it was never something that I enjoyed, especially after seeing my brothers being dragged away in ambulances. So I couldn't imagine what that was like for young people who have just been through child abuse and been through this traumatic experience and don't know necessarily what's going on. So I created a safe space for them where they can thrive and they can talk to people and they can understand that you are no longer in that hardships, but instead you are on your way out and you are on your way to make sure that you are successful. And most of all, is that this room should show more than anything that you are loved. So because of my works oftentimes, and I was able to spread the word even further. And so I was able to be on the Marvel's Hero Project, which is still streaming on Disney Plus, episode 2, if you want to learn a little bit about my story. But it also has some other really cool features, whether it was Kelly Clarkson or being on an H&M backpack and things like that. However, this for me was never about the next magazine or the next article that had me in it. However, this is more about is that now more people are going to firstly understand child abuse. That is one more conversation that is going to be started. But also this is understanding that our young people today are not made to just sit around and play video games, or are not made to go to school, do homework, and go to sleep. But instead we are made to get involved, that we have been through experiences, that we have seen the trauma that's going on in our world today. And we are ready to help overcome that as a whole. That we're ready to come together and truly make a change where we see changes fit. So from this all, I created an organization called Hero Voices. Now, here's our mission statement if you choose to read this. You can also find that more on my website, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But Hero Voices is simply dedicated to the empowerment of young people with emphasis on making sure all young people understand the importance of safety and being protected. So what we do is that we'll help other young people get started in their activism and their campaigns, but we also will go to schools and other events where we can talk to young people and say, hey, there's something going on at home. We need you to tell someone, whether that is a principal or whether that's a friend you trust, we need you to tell someone. Or whether that was you're the friend that someone has told, it is crucial that you go and tell someone, especially because that is how I first learned about child abuse. And so this is a little bit, a couple more pictures of how Hero Voices continue. We do events where we're able to spread the word more. And also, I want to quickly talk about child abuse reform. So here are just a couple of points I want to quickly go over, but it starts with simply changing the language. How do we talk every day really can have an impact on the people that we're around, especially our young people. So we have to realize that these young people who have made it through this traumatic experience are no longer victims, but they are survivors. They've overcome something that has been hard. They have overcome something that has changed their lives. But however, we are here to make sure they are supported. We also look to the enhancements to social services, where this means better funding or us simply coming together to talking about this more. We understand that this system as a whole is not perfect when it comes down to protecting our young people. So it's time that we come together and we understand that we are here to support our young people. And that is personally why I love organizations such as Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina. We look to people such as Gabriel Fernandez as inspiration to keep moving. We look to people such as Gabriel Fernandez as inspiration to develop those peer support groups and encourage counseling, to develop more pediatric safe rooms, to have more conversations and education at schools and faith organizations, because this is the current reality of hundreds of kids across America. There's hundreds of Gabriel Fernandez's, and let him be someone that can show us that we need to continue to move, that we need to continue to put policies in place, we need to continue to act, and most of all, we need to continue to come together. So we also want to look at keeping our young people safe. And this is truly the most important thing. So this is just a couple of things that can really help that. And it starts with stopping human trafficking and overall child trafficking, because it is something that it is not just about kids being kidnapped in these big white vans, but it is something of really more intent and it's something more specific, whether it's coercion or whether it's someone just building trust over time, which is known as grooming and things like that. So it's time that we come to terms with it, but then we educate our young people on what that looks like and what that means. We're creating a safe space for boys and girls to emotionally express themselves. And this goes for both genders, which is something that's also really important. But we also learn how to teach about body boundaries and teaching what's good and what's bad touch and things like that. We also want to offer education in schools and also within the faith organization. Like I said earlier, our faith organizations should be there to help support our young people in any way that our young people are needed them. And so finally, I would like to end with a quote that says, when one falls, we all fall, but when one rises, we all rise. So actually just take all this information and we absorb it, but then we use it to not only lift up ourselves, but then also lift up the young people that we are helping, lift up the people around us, and lift up the people that we care about. So here's just a little bit of information about myself. And like I said, you can find all this information on my website, which is incredibleelijah.com. So I would like to thank Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina for this amazing opportunity. And it's truly been an honor. Now, before I do end this little video, I want to thank all of you for the work that you guys do every single day. Thank you so much for being on the front lines, for handling these issues head on, and for making sure that our young people are truly safe. Thank you all so much. And I look forward to seeing you all again, maybe in person when we can finally get through this pandemic as a community.
Can you say, wow, how phenomenal You know, we have had a whole bunch of a different array of speakers on here today, and they've all been awesome. And as you can see, this coalition building, this advocacy work even reaches out to the youth. So, wow, at Elijah. And thank you, Elijah, so much for sharing those inspiring words with us today. And I want to reiterate a quote that he said at the end that we all need to keep in mind as we go about this work and as we go through these institutes. When one falls, we all fall, but when one rises, we all rise. So just keep that in mind as you go about your work and the work that we do, and as we move through these advocacy institutes, these policy institutes. So at this time, we'll be transitioning into our panel discussion. Today's panelists are Mebane Boyd, the Resilient Communities Officer at the North Carolina Partnership for Children, Shayla Aries, North Carolina Campaign Director of Mama Comprador, Moms Rising, and Greg Borum, Director of Advocacy for Children First, Communities and Schools of Buncombe County. Both Malia Rose Waters, Policy Director at Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina, and I will be moderating today's panel. Our questions are based off the input that we received from you all, and we may not be able to answer all of your questions live, just depending on our time. But we are asking if the panelists are okay with it. We will be sharing their emails in the chat so that you can reach out to them directly, and they may be able to answer any questions that you might have. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I see Shayla's on, Mebane's on. Is Greg on? Okay, I've got so many blocks up here. I just wanted to make sure. Welcome, guys. Thank you for being here and being part of the panel. We're going to start with a really simple question. And that is, so briefly, like 1 minute, tell us a bit about what you do and how you got involved in community advocacy or coalition building. And Shayla, you're first on my screen, so we'll go ahead and start with you if that's fine.
Yes, thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. I feel very honored and privileged to have this space to share with you guys. I'm a little bit nervous, but that's okay. And to answer your question, it's amazing journey. The more I thought about answering this question last night, it just took me back to 2013 when I really had the opportunity as a parent whose kids benefit from early Head Start, Medicaid, WIC, and food stamps at the time. I also benefit from early Head Start guidance and programs that they have for parents. So at that time, Durham Partnership for Children's reached out to Early Head Start, and they were looking for a mother or a parent who had a strong story on sharing their unique, authentic experience on how these programs made a difference. So my former director at the time said, I'm going to put it in your name. And I said, okay, really honestly didn't know how much of an impact this was or where the heck I was going, but I was excited. And so December 18, 2013, in front of congressmen and representatives, I have the opportunity to give my testimony on how this impacted my family. And I have 2 kids. My oldest has special needs. And so she has definitely opened those doors to this amazing journey called Advocate for Parents and everything that comes along with that. And so I had my first opportunity then with Moms Rising, and years later, here I am, when Ben volunteered with them, came out part-time employed with them, and now I'm full-time, and I continue to just have the same goals for my family and for other families to make sure that we continue to have welcome spaces for Hispanic voices at roundtable conversations.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shayla. Mebane, you're next on my screen if you would like to go.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm just really honored to be here. My background is I'm a social worker and was I've been involved with a lot of nonprofits, but most recently, I'll go back 3, the New Hanover County Smart Start, where I was the family service manager working primarily with families who had lost custody of their children, and realized all the obstacles that were in the way of these families and things that led to them finding themselves in that predicament. When the opportunity came up to lead the New Hanover Resiliency Task Force, I took a leave of absence to do that for 6 months. And then I got into it and loved it. And they found a way to keep me on board for about 3 years before where I am now, which is the North Carolina Partnership for Children as the Resilient Communities Officer, working with communities across the state who are looking to build coalitions and collaboratives to work to reduce ACEs and create healthier, more resilient communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mebane. And Greg.
Hi, good morning. Thanks so much for the invitation and opportunity to be here. I'll say that I first got started in community advocacy and coalition building in 1994 when I was assigned to a program with the United Methodist Church to a community center in Biloxi, Mississippi. And I had 2 powerful mentors, Carol Burnett and Geraldine Osborne, who really showed me the ropes of policy advocacy work at state and local levels and community organizing. And through their amazing mentorship and their belief in me, I really learned how to build coalitions and move campaigns around advocacy. And I've been just grateful and so fortunate now to work in nonprofits doing policy advocacy since 1994, and most recently for the past almost 15 years at Children First Communities and Schools of Buncombe County.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, we have a lot of expertise on this panel today, Malia.
Yes, we sure do.
I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for the first question.
I am going to start with a question for Mebane. You have, facilitated building a coalition on the local level through the New Hanover Resiliency Task Force. And now you're working with coalitions from across the state to provide a framework for the ACEs and resilience work in North Carolina statewide through that Healthy and Resilient Communities initiative. So thinking back to your time in New Hanover County, that's in Wilmington, by the way, if anyone doesn't know where New Hanover County is. How did you bring people together toward this common goal of addressing ACEs and building resiliency in New Hanover?
So I was really lucky because when I started as the Resiliency Task Force Director, there was already a core group of folks that had begun meeting following the filming of the screening of the film Resilience here. So the DA was involved, a judge, the school system, county government, nonprofits. There were a lot of folks at the table. I think some of the things that I did with those folks who were already at the table, and I want to recognize those communities that are working, sometimes it's really hard to get those folks to the table. But once they were at the table, I think one of the things we did well was to sort of create this culture of yes, like when people said, let's try this. I think it's really easy sometimes to say, oh no, that's been tried and it doesn't work, or oh, we've already done that, or we're too busy to do that. That we really tried to say yes whenever we could, with the caveat that we don't say yes when people start their sentence with, you could. I think a lot of times we get people say, well, you could do this or you could do this, but as one person, I couldn't say yes to do the things, but we could as a collective. Yes, we can do that. How do we want to do it? I think we also created a culture of support among one another, that we really created friendships and connections where we cared about one another so that we could have hard conversations when those needed to happen, but that we really creating those kinds of cultures, like Elijah was saying, the culture of safety. I thought it was so powerful. That was one of the things that we tried to do, to create the right culture so that we could do our work well.
I love that. A culture of yes. I love that. It's like having a yes day with your kids, right? It's like, oh, we're going to do whatever all day long today, right? I love that though. And, you know, when you were in New Hanover, you're working with the task force individually there, the task force just there. And now you're working with all of these coalitions from across the state that many of them have come together to address ACEs, resilience. They're working on a lot of different initiatives. How is your work in New Hanover County similar to what you're doing now on the statewide level?
It's very similar. And I think what I was just talking about in terms of that culture of support and culture of safety, that I think at the state level, you know, we need those relationships to be ones where we can collaborate, ones when we can say hard things, ones where we can hear hard things. So I find that to be a similar, at least on my part, one of my goals in doing the work. Another similarity is just great people. People are so passionate about this work. Not just when I was in New Hanover, but I'm finding across the state, my gosh, we have a great state. And people are doing really creative things. They have great ideas. And I'm loving hearing from folks all over this diverse state of different challenges, but yet very similar challenges. So I think one of the things, New Hanover is urban. And so I'm doing a lot of learning about what the specific needs are in rural communities, and how those needs are often more pronounced because of the lack of resources. And how do we, even though we're striving towards the same goals, the way we get there, I think, is different depending on our communities. I don't know if that answers that question.
No, that does. What are some of the differences that you're seeing as far as, you know, local coalitions versus statewide coalitions that you're working with?
Yeah, I really tried to think about differences, Malia. I did have this question ahead of time, and I don't feel, I really couldn't come up with something that was really different. I think sometimes, and I'm new in this job, I'm 5 months in, so I think I still get to say I'm new. I guess one of my learnings is working in this at the state level has been it's not quite as nimble as what can happen on a local level. You know, so a group of folks in a room can say, let's pick up the phone and call Representative Lee or Senator Lee. And we can do that, but working in statewide organizations, there's a lot more layers of who do we need to speak to about this? We need to run this by these folks first. I have felt sometimes I'm a little nostalgia for New Hanover County times when we could just say, okay, let's you call him, I'll call her, and then we're going to go next Tuesday to do this. I think that's that really nice thing about local collaboratives.
No, thank you. I think that is a big difference, right? Whenever it's bigger, there are more moving pieces, and so there are more layers to the work, right? So thank you. Stacy, I will turn it over to you for the next question.
All right. And I am going to ask Greg a question. So you've been actively involved, with advocating for policies that expand opportunities for child and family resiliency, stability, and health. And it spans across 3 key areas through an initiative called the Success Equation. So can you tell us a little about the history of this success equation, like who was involved and how it came to be?
Be happy to. We began the early conversations that would become the success equation back in about 2009. Our organization provides both direct services as well as policy advocacy. And we feel that it's important that we do both because we see that there's always, every day children and families access the variety of services that we provide and others in our community, building assets, building trust, but that we also understand that the background of policy that shapes what opportunities and resources are available in our community is really key to meeting our mission to improve the lives of children, youth, and families. And so we had at the time really been focusing on the impact of child poverty in Buncombe County and began pulling together a roundtable of faith leaders, community leaders, business leaders, and other nonprofits to talk about what would it look like if we really came together and identified policy solutions at local and state levels that could intervene in addressing child poverty and the outcomes there. That led us to a 2-year process of learning and conversation, discernment, focus groups with families and service providers across our county. And in 2011, we held a 1.5-day summit called the Success Equation in Asheville that brought together about 115 folks for a 1.5 days. We had clergy, we had bankers, we had social workers, we had teachers, we had parents who were utilizing our Department of Social Services programs. We had formerly homeless people there. We had just a huge cross section of our community, and we used that day to really gather a collective vision for what would it look like if we were able to really lift our community in a way going forward together to mitigate the impact of child poverty. And so that's what that was really the beginning of that initiative. And since 2011, it's morphed and changed, but it continues to really center a public policy agenda that brings a variety of supporters from around our community together to advocate at local and state levels for good policy.
Okay, that's awesome. That kind of leads into a follow-up question, because you have a robust policy agenda for 2021, and it includes early childhood, family economic stability, and family supports, which kind of goes along with your membership in the stuff that you just talked about a minute ago. But how do you determine what will be on your policy, on that policy agenda?
Well, the short answer is a lot of it is what was on our policy agenda last year, because it takes a long time to win policy victories. So a lot of it is just like, yep, that still needs to be worked on, carry it over. But the more coalition responsive answer to that is that we have a leadership team that works with us to evaluate what policies we've worked on, looking at opportunities for things that we think can be moved at local and state levels. We also relied a lot on our partnerships with some key state organizations, especially NC Child, Budget and Tax Center, and North Carolina Housing Coalition. And so there's conversation with them too about what might be happening. And then we also, with our success equation, the organizations that participate with us who have very deep links to on the ground community organizing and community engagement, We are in conversation with them too about the issues and policy issues that are being lifted out of the conversations and the work that they're doing, so that it's we have a real kind of full circle, from we're out here in Buncombe County, so mountaintop view of what the needs are and what we need to address. And then we try to whittle it down into a sense of what are the issues that we're going to really invest a lot of time and resources on and lead, because we don't have unlimited resources. We also list in that policy agenda the organizations that we will partner with, because we never do policy advocacy alone. And then we also list the policy issues that are going to be more like, we want to track these and we want to publicize them, but we just don't have a lot of resources to kind of be in that campaign in a deep and meaningful way, but they're important to us. And so that's what leads to our policy agenda each year. And like I said, a lot of it does get carried over, because we all know that this is a marathon, not a race.
Right. Carried over and partnerships is what I heard in there. So a lot of carryover and an emphasis on partnerships. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Malia. I'm going to turn it over to you to go to the next panelist.
Yeah. So Shayla, Moms Rising, or Mamás con Poder, which is the Spanish language sister of Moms Rising. It's a grassroots organization focused on advocacy and issues that impact families. So you talked a little bit about how, through the Durham partnership that you got involved with Moms Rising, but I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about your advocacy journey, because you came into this space as a parent advocating for your child, and now you're a campaign director. So can you share a little bit about the middle part and how you got to where you are today?
It has been an amazing journey, and honestly, I don't often believe that I am where I am, because I can relate to a lot of parents how the struggle has been real. I've always shared this, that when I was pregnant, you have all those comments as a parent that tells you, oh, well, you're going to have a stinky house because of the diapers. You're going to change all these diapers. You're not going to sleep. But they never really tell you what happened if you have a child with a birth defect or special needs. Like, those are things that I guess it's human nature not to talk about, because we all assume that we're going to have our perfect child. And those have been the things that have definitely impacted my life. I've never thought that I would have a kid with all this. I've never in a million years would have thought that I've gone through all this if you would have asked me years before. But those are the things that I know that are meant for a reason, and why I continue to do the work that I do. The journey for my child and I have been definitely a very unique journey. And I used to say it's been really hard and bad, but we call it a unique journey, because along the ways I've met a lot of families who have definitely shared their beautiful stories. And we came to realize that there's a lot of programs, a lot of agencies, a lot of service in our communities and laws that are not designed for our children. So that continues to motivate me to change policies, to change the world. It might seem like a big picture to change the world and impossible, but it's not. I realize that our voices do matter. And I realize that there's a lot of parents who are filled with love and passion and strong desire to change things around this world for our children. And so I've been really blessed and privileged to be in so many different settings, different representing different organizations, speaking in a lot of different issues that we currently have. But the privilege out of that is not just to benefit my family, but it's to benefit many other families. Mamás con Poder has definitely given me a lot of tools, support to meet people where they are. And that's all it takes. It's meeting families where they are at their moment and realizing that your work agenda, whether you're providing services or making sure that things are done, needs to stop at a moment when you meet these families. You need to just take a step back and realize that we're humans. We have other priorities at the moment. And when you realize that and you stop and you meet families where they are, the outcomes are amazing. So I got to meet you through a lot of the work that I've done. I got to meet a lot of strong women that don't even have kids, but they feel so passionate about making a different world. And so I was very inspired by Elisha's speech, where he says we need to all create a world. And that's exactly what we're doing. I want to create a world where my kids can be adults and enjoy it, because the world that we're living in as kids, it's a scary world for them. And it breaks my heart to know that it's even scary world for families whose voices are not being heard, who have barriers to communicate, and who are being discriminated against in this country.
Thank you so much for mentioning, meeting parents where they are. I think that's so important in this work and coalition building and any type of movement, right? Meeting people where they are. You're often the parent voice at a lot of tables, right? Like representing and making sure that the parent voice is heard. I'm wondering if you could tell me, to you, what does it mean to have authentic parent engagement as a part of a coalition? Because oftentimes when we're building coalitions, we want to invite parents to the table, absolutely. But how can we ensure that we are doing that in an authentic way, and really centering the voices of parents?
That is a great question, especially as we're dealing with a lot of different issues that we want to change, and that we discovered that the pandemic only brought more things. But I think a coalition, it's a unique place where we really need to take advantage of it, because we are collaborating with so many other groups, organization, agencies, and we all are in this setting. And I feel that to ensure that this representation is there, is basically allowing parents, authentic voices to come forward, to understand that the value parents bring to these places, it's amazing. And this is also to say to white people, don't feel scared in a way, to allow parents to come to the voice. Allow yourself to be uncomfortable, because then you will discover things that you never thought you would. But it's also opportunity to create and open these spaces to eliminate those barriers that parents have, the caregivers. And when I mean parents, I also mean caregivers or guardians, they are caring for the children. But if we all come into this coalition work, it's because we all have one goal, and that is to create a better place for children. And what better way than to have those parents who are dealing with these situations? We need to continue to see us parents as part of the formula and the solution. We are not just there to be your check mark in a way. We're not just there because your grant said you need to have a parent. We're there because our authentic stories are what makes your job so much easier in a way. And we want to be able to make sure that we are valued, that we are a team. And I think a lot of the places and a lot of the time, there are people who are afraid to be parents into the table because misconceptions, stereotypes, or whatever. But I think that if you give it a break, if you give it a chance, the opportunity, parents can bring so much value into the balance of the work that we're doing. So, I'll find an authentic table and of a coalition represented by parents if we have a diversity. If we have a diversity of parents who are these issues or these goals that we have, parents are there because they're being affected. You can't just have a coalition of white people or just Black people. We have to bring the brown people, we have to bring the Asian people in, because these are the people that are being affected daily by this type of issues. So, that's just like a cake. You need a lot of ingredients, and we all bring different ingredients to make a really beautiful cake. So that's what I think. And it works, I think North Carolina has improved a lot over the years, and we're in a really positive path to this, but we still need that little push forward for more parents to come forward.
I have a follow-up question for you, Shayla. When we're thinking about inviting parents to the table, it can be really hard to share your personal story. Oftentimes when we're inviting parents to come to the table, they're sharing what has happened. How can we ensure that we're creating a safe and welcoming place for parents to share their stories, to really feel like comfortable with being in a space that maybe they haven't been in before, right? Maybe they haven't been involved in advocacy. And I'm thinking back to whenever you first got involved with Moms Rising, and how I'm sure you're probably nervous at first, like what am I going to do? How am I going to talk to these elected officials? What supported you, and who supported you and helped you get to the place where you felt more comfortable with that?
I'm always nervous because I never know who's going to be, especially via Zoom. You never know who's behind. And sometimes we don't have time when there's like a big group to really get to know everyone. So you don't know how things are going to be well received. And sharing your story, it is, I personally think it's very, it's like a roller coaster. And I've also heard it from different parents because you are reliving good or bad experience that bring emotions to yourself. And so, making a safe place, I have good and bad experience both. But I think coming as a Moms Rising person, volunteer at the time, it really helped for people to give me the opportunity to get to know me, to tell me what I was comfortable with sharing and how I was comfortable in sharing, to acknowledge that it was my time and not their time, and to take my time sharing this and making this space. And I think that is very important when you are bringing new people into the table. It's like you're bringing someone to your house, right? You want to get to know that person as much as you can. You want to understand their background. You want to know what they're comfortable with. And for my Hispanic Latinx families, you want to make sure that there is someone professionally interpreting from them. There's so many barriers that you have to buy, but also retaliation. It's a big one in my community, because we are sharing good and bad experience. Sometimes we are not, we have that fear that retaliation is going to come and it's going to hurt either our kids or our ability to be eligible for any type of program. And that is huge. And I also want to clarify that I am a second generation. So we still in my house use the word Hispanic. I know most new people use the word Latinx, and I just said use whatever word it's better with your community. The parents that I work with are about to get used to the word Latinx, but it's not very familiar yet. But that is also one of the things that we have to recognize when we invite parents to the table. What word would they want to use? How do they want to express themselves, and what title they want to use? I think there's a lot of barriers that I can name, but there's also a lot of good things that I can say. When you bring someone to a new space, just give them the opportunity, a natural opportunity. And always remember that we're all humans. We're probably not prepared a lot of the times. And for a lot of us, English is our second language. So just being there, it's already a good experience for us, right? So I thank you so much for the opportunity. And I think this is an amazing question that we can all elaborate and continue to make it better, to continue to create safe places for parents.
I love that, Shayla, so much. Like thinking about, you're inviting someone into your home. How would you treat someone that you're inviting to your home? And if you're not sure, how to address someone, ask them. Just ask, right? Just say, how would you like for me to, would you like Hispanic? And I will, full disclosure, I asked Shayla this question before we met today. I said, tell me what you prefer. And she was like, I'd be happy to talk about that, because I think that is just critical, right? Like sometimes we're afraid that we're going to mess up, but we just need to ask, right? Stacey, I will go back to you now.
All right. So the next few questions we're going to ask are going to be for all of the panelists, for all of you. And there's no certain order. So the first question is going to be, we've heard, each of you kind of talk about the memberships of your coalition and who you have involved as partners to help you guys as you develop this. But we also heard from you that there are certain groups whose representation on that coalition was probably essential partnership that you needed for building that coalition and moving them forward. So when you're in those coalitions and you've got everybody around the table, how do you ensure that the voices of those groups or those partnerships that you have there are heard? So does anybody want to go first, or do you want me to call on someone? All right, Greg, we'll start with you.
Let's try not to make eye contact. Yeah, well, you know, I don't know that there's one answer to that question other than I think it's all about, you know, this work moves at the speed of trust. I think a lot of us have heard that before. And so I really do think that centering relationships as an outcome is an important thing to remember, that we're not just trying to get a policy goal accomplished. We're trying to strengthen the capacity in our communities to work together, to have, to kind of continue spiraling up. So learning together, working together, having the relationships and networks and trust. And I think that, for me, it's important that space be made available in coalition meetings. It's been a little harder with COVID and moving everything virtual, because a lot of that relationship building, I think, in meeting time would happen on the fringes, as people arrive and before people leave. And so now trying to make sure that we have space still in our Zoom lives to still feel like we can connect. And then another thing that we've started doing in our meetings too is just practicing some of the resiliency coaching around centering our breath. And so we start each meeting with a chance just to center and take some deep breaths together and kind of come into the virtual space, because we know that everyone's running fast and furious. So I think that over the years, and again, we've been at this for a really long time, but I loved what Sheila had to say about, it's like inviting someone to the house. And so when new people and or groups are coming on, we always want to be careful not to just speak in acronyms. We want to make sure that we're doing some, available for kind of chats before, after a meeting, to make sure people have understood what we're talking about, have the background that they need, and then really working to just, again, create that collaborative space where everyone has a chance to speak up. And I think with our groups now, again, we've been running for a while, and so I think there's just a natural step up, step back mentality. But I do agree that early on, it's very important maybe to set very intentional ground rules. And so that's what I'll say, and then I'll pass it to somebody else who will say it much better.
That was good. No, that was really good, because some of those, are principles and practices that we practice, when we invite families to the table, or when we have new people at meetings. So not just in coalitions around policy and stuff like that. Mevin?
Yeah, great job, Greg. I think you touched on a lot of really good things. Some of the things I think we did in New Hanover, where we had an orientation meeting for people who were new, that we would build that into our meetings so that new folks could come and at least get the basic information about what we did at the meeting, so that there wasn't, they weren't just dropped into a room full of people that they wouldn't know what they were talking about. So, again, to those acronyms and just sort of giving folks a 101 to the group. And interestingly, Greg, yesterday we had a meeting at NCPC where we did a icebreaker activity that I thought would take like 5 minutes, and it ended up taking closer to 20. And my heart was beating so fast, like there's so much we need to get to, but the group was connecting around this, I think, this icebreaker activity. And I kept sort of saying to myself, sort of this group therapy technique of trust the group, like trust the group. Like this is where we spent some of our time yesterday. And It's a valuable exercise that we need to treasure, rather than thinking, oh, people are dying to get to the real work, when actually the real work, part of that is making those connections. And I can recall a lot of times hearing from people, well, when are we really going to get to work around this? Really not valuing the time that we were spending building our connections and our relationships. So I think lifting one another's voices and trusting that process, that if the group continues to need that time to connect, to just be willing to live in that space a little longer.
Awesome. Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. Shayla?
I think icebreakers, just to piggyback on what Megan said, are actually the door for opportunity for you to connect and get to know people, because often the icebreakers can just be, people call them, well, just let's break the floor so we can all work, but it really isn't, because that's where you hear why people are there and their stories. So there's like the door for you to know why you're there and what you connect with people. And as we know, stories are powerful. I think for me, it's a little bit different than both Greg and Megan, because when I go into certain places, I already know, and they already know that I'm there wearing my parent hat, because I am a Hispanic voice representative, or, sharing my opinion or my points from many other different parents. So it's a little bit different for me, but I will agree, just making sure that I just make sure that I always connect back and say, this is not just me, this is other parents who are beside me with this, and I want to continue making that space as much as welcome as I can, just like Moms Rising did for me back then and many other places, because I want to leave that door open for many more voices to come. There's so many more representation needed, not just for me, but for many other Hispanic families out there. So I want to say, I think that I'm setting the floor correctly when I'm asking for interpretation, materials, translation, all the things that is needed for families and parents to feel fully prepared and to come to this table prepare as anybody else. And so I agree with everyone said, and just continue to create a safe space for my parents.
Awesome. Yes. And it kind of goes back to the question Malia had talked with you about earlier, creating it like it's your home, like you're welcoming somebody into your home. So it kind of goes back to that connection and that welcomeness and the feeling of belonging there and being a partner. So, okay, Malia, thank you so much. Shayla, thank you so much, guys, for taking the time to answer that question. Malia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
And I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to see in the Q&A. Diane asked Mebin what was the icebreaker that they used in the meeting yesterday. And she said, we asked everyone to share their favorite children's book. People really wanted to share not just the name of the book, but why they loved it. We also found out that a few folks on the call didn't have lots of books growing up, which was sharing something vulnerable too. And it was a great activity. So Mebin, I do want to follow up with you and kind of ask, I think you might have a little bit of a unique perspective on the panel, where when you were in New Hanover, you had in-person relationships with so many of those people that you had built. So when we transitioned to virtual, you already had relationships with so many people, right? You moved into a new role now where you're building relationships virtually. Getting to know people virtually. What have been some challenges and what have been some of the benefits of this new virtual environment?
Well, I think Greg definitely touched on this, that you don't have those before and after the meeting times where, when we had our monthly meetings, there were folks sometimes who hung around for 30, 45 minutes afterwards to really get deep into the conversation on a topic that maybe wasn't as appropriate for a group conversation, but was more a one-on-one opportunity. People actually hung around in smaller groups, figuring out ways they could collaborate. Like, let's do this. You know, I heard you say this. Do you think you could speak to our board? You know, there just were those extra opportunities, I think, that when you're in person, you're able to have. On the other hand, I think we're able to, for good or bad, we're able to go to a lot more meetings now. And I think there's attendance wise, I think you don't have to drive across town to get to a meeting. So you really can, you know, pop in for 30 minutes if you can't be there for the whole thing. I think there's a participation wise, Zoom has allowed us to be present, if not fully, we're still able to participate in a lot more things. I think also with Zoom, we're able to share documents and visual things by sharing our screens that we probably didn't do as much when we were in person. So one of the things I've heard a strategy somebody had where they built in drive time to their Zoom meetings. And I thought, you know, in terms of your own stress and going from meeting to meeting to meeting, like that was a really great strategy. Like I'm just 15, if the meeting's at 10, I'm going to start going to that meeting at 9:45. And when it's over at 11, I'm going to come back in at 11:15. Like those were times when we processed what happened at the meeting. Those were times when we really thought about our role in the conversations. And I think we need to value that again. And I'll say finally, one more thing. I'm toying with the idea of opening our meetings earlier. You know, if the meeting starts at 10, what if I open the Zoom room at 9:50 and keep it open until 11:10 so that those folks who want to continue the conversation in a smaller, more, I'll put it in quotation marks, intimate, you know, environments where you can really not feel like you're dominating the conversation.
Let's all normalize drive time before and after meetings, right? I love that. I've never heard that before. So let's normalize that, right? Stacy, I will hand it back over to you now.
All right. So I'm going to ask, I have a follow-up question for Greg. You ground your work in the value-based advocacy. Can you tell us a little about what that means for the advocacy work that you're involved in?
Yes, let me try to do that briefly. One of the things that has been kind of a constant soapbox for me over the years has been to get more nonprofit organizations, especially those that are doing direct service work, to participate in public policy advocacy. I think that so many nonprofits have deep community connections. They have trust. They have parents. They know how policy is playing out in people's lives every day, but they feel timid, or as an organization, they don't feel they've got the capacity or the tools, and in some cases, even outright misinformation that nonprofits cannot be involved in advocacy. You know, we can't be quote unquote political. And I will just say that is true, that nonprofit organizations, 501c3s, cannot be partisan. We can't support or endorse parties or candidates, but we have a legal right to lobby, to advocate, to do education. And so when our organization was doing its strategic planning process around how to really ramp up and revitalize our advocacy work, we did a lot of reading and looking around and kind of came up with our own version of this values-based advocacy model that we've been really fortunate to now do trainings on with other organizations in the Western North Carolina and even some statewide to help nonprofits drop back down to like the values that got you into the direct service work are the same value platforms that should get you into the public policy advocacy work. And so we, as nonprofit organizations, again, we have that mission statement. A lot of us have like value statements. And so we really try to take organizations, including our own, to connect the dots. Like if one of our values is opportunity for children to succeed, for example, like, well, what are the policy things that, like, we know what programs we do trying to do that, but then what are the policy things that are like running in the background that are either enhancing that direct service work or putting up, a gap in that. And so that's what we mean by values advocacy, values-based advocacy, is really understanding what motivates you. And then also the second piece of that is using that to communicate with your volunteers, your community, your donors, your policymakers, the value first, because we found as advocates that swim in the advocacy and acronym waters, oftentimes we show up to a policymaker or somebody else and say, oh my gosh, have you heard about House Bill 325? It's going to take 20% of next fiscal year's budget and allocate it to this. It's like, nobody knows what you're talking about. Even policymakers, unless they wrote the bill, probably don't know what you're talking about. But if you show up and start with a values-based message, like, I care deeply about making sure that our children have the opportunity to come into this world healthy and succeed, that's a disarming start to a conversation. And it's also a truth, we believe, that we have a lot more common when we start speaking values languages than showing up first with like a policy position. And so when we can have nonprofits feel comfortable that they understand the values that are aligned with their policy strategy, they can communicate a values-based message. And even if there's disagreement over like how they're going to vote on a bill, for example, at least we can come back and keep saying, well, remember, we have both agreed that we want children to succeed. Can we keep talking around that, like, even if it's not going to happen on this bill? So that's my best summary statement, but we do a whole like 3-hour training with boards and all on that. So I'll cut it off there, but that's what we mean.
Well, awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much. Malia, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yes, so I am going to go ahead and go to our last question of our panel discussion. And this is a question that I have for each of you to answer. So what advice would you give to advocates for children, youth, and families who would like to get involved in coalition building or advocacy? Like, if you could go back in time and somebody could have told you this one piece of advice before you got involved in the work that you're doing right now, what would have been so helpful for you to hear? And who wants to go first? Mebin, you look like you're ready.
Well, I'm not really. I smiled.
Okay.
But that's like a really great question. One thing I wish we had done better in New Hanover, but I don't know how we would have done it, was, we had this group of folks at the table who were really decision makers, people who could speak on behalf of their agencies, whether it was DSS or the court system or the school system. Like we had the decision makers at the table, and we didn't have the family voice at the table when we started. And I won, if I had to do it over again, how would I have done that better? And I think that was one thing I felt like looking back on it, rather than it's an afterthought, something we've learned, oh yeah, we've got to have the families here. We've already been established for 2.5 years and we've made lots of big decisions, and families weren't, there were people at the table who were parts of families, but weren't also associated with organizations. So I think if somebody could have told me when I started that work, well, you've got this really powerful group of people, but you don't have that voice there. I wish I had known that, been educated on that better at the start.
Thank you. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that, Mevin, because I do think it's hard when we look back and we say, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? Like I wish that I had done something a little bit differently. But I also say though, Mevin, in response to that, I also consider, are you ready to have parents at the table, right? Like, do you know what you're doing and kind of what the direction and the vision is? So, I say that to like, don't beat yourself up too bad about it. Because,
I don't, but I also think, and we had those conversations. So when we talk about the yes culture, like, we said anybody can come. We said that from the very beginning. But if the vision and mission is created without family voice, then is it really the mission vision of the community, or is it the mission vision of just the folks at the table? So and it doesn't hurt my feelings. I'm big girl, but I think I said that to myself too, like, were we ready? But the other side of me pushes back, like, yes, but we wrote the mission vision without strong family voice at the table.
I hear you. I hear you. Thank you. Shayla?
I agree with both of you. I think those are essential. I think what I've have seen and what I would like to share is basically, do not start any coalition without engaging parents as experts. Like, even if it's from the beginning, do not forget when you're making the list of who you would like to be in this coalition, don't forget parents, and don't put parents as a guest. Put them as part of everything that you have to ensure there is equal opportunities, and make sure, like Evan said, make sure that that you guys are ready for this space for parents. Don't just bring parents because they're parents and because you have to have them and because they're going to be your check mark. That is the worst things you can do, because we feel unuseful, and that discourage parents short and long term for outcomes. So, just add them from the beginning, making sure that you fully prepare for parents with compensation, learning, evaluation, recognizing everything that comes along, and always include them.
Thank you for mentioning to the compensation. And I think that's part of the readiness, right? That if we're asking people to give their time, then we need to be willing to provide some sort of stipend or compensation for their time and expertise as well, right? So thank you. And Greg?
Sure. I think the question included, like, if you could go back in time, right, and give ourselves a little nugget of wisdom.
Yeah, what advice would you have for anyone who wants to get involved in either advocacy or coalition building?
Yeah, that would be a fun little thing to do, to go back and hand myself some notes. And I think one of the ones that I feel is important for folks getting into policy advocacy work is to have a sense of the nonlinear path that policy work takes and the long-term work that policy takes. It really, when I began almost 30 years ago, much younger and less gray, I was ready to come out and, we're gonna get things done and change the world. And I came across a report that we had put together on addressing child poverty in Mississippi that we wrote back in like the late 1990s. And, the policy recommendations are still what we're saying today, decades later. And so, it's there is that sense of like, well, gosh, have we really accomplished anything? And I think that that leads to my next bit of advice, is that the accomplishment has been the deep work with and the relationships built around that work and the collective knowledge and skills and understanding. While, unfortunately, the things from that report of access to childcare, access to healthcare, and better wages are still on our agenda here in 2021. We have built, stronger bases. We have built networks. We have built people who can, built relationships where we can share the load, share the burden, celebrate the joys, celebrate the heartbreak that advocacy work entails. It's not linear. It's a long-term thing, and I think that the key to it is it's the relationships, and it is that sense of working together and of continuing to be there for each other, to help each other learn and to move through this. And we've still got a ways to go, and we'll keep doing it, but we'll do it together.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all so much. I learned something new today, many new things, but I'm going to remember inviting someone into my home in particular. I just think that's just such a great way to think about this work, and really appreciate you all sharing your expertise with us and your knowledge and your experience. I just very much appreciate it. We're going to pop everyone's email address into the chat. So if you want to connect with our panelists after today, there was a really good question in here in the chat about some strategies for how to invite parents to the table. So Shayla maybe is answering that. Oh, another link. Okay. So I want to turn it over to Stacy now to do a quick wrap up for us. I will talk to our panelists to see if we can provide a couple of strategies for how to engage parents as well to send out in the follow-up email. Okay. Stacy?
Sounds good. Thank you, guys. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Malia. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. Thank you to all of our speakers, our wonderful speakers, our wonderful panelists. We have saved a few minutes here at the end so that you have a chance to complete today's evaluation. We will share the link on a slide shortly, and we will really appreciate your feedback. So please take in these last few minutes, if you can, to complete that evaluation. And if you're not able to do it today, it will be sent out in the email. So we'll share that in the chat, I believe, and on a slide. We will also be sharing a recording of today's events via email. They will also have, there will also be certificates of participation available. So please reach out to Carly Whittick at cwhittick@preventchildabusennc.org, and I'm sure that she'll put that into the chat here in a second if you would like to request that certificate. And again, thank you so much for staying with us for these couple of hours and engaging with the panelists and the speakers. We look forward to seeing you guys at our next institute on Tuesday, September 28th. If you have not registered, please do so, because if you register for one, it does not mean that you're registered for all of them. So if you would like to attend all of them, please make sure you register individually for them. Thank you guys so much.